20 years after graduation, I walked into my high school reunion expecting nothing more than awkward small talk and lukewarm punch. What I got instead was a night that would forever change how I saw my past, my present, and the power of respect earned through sacrifice. By the time those familiar faces from Jefferson High realized who I'd become, it was already too late for apologies. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday in March, crisp white paper with gold lettering that seemed to mock me from my kitchen counter. Jefferson High School Class of 2004, 20-year reunion. I stared at it for what felt like hours, memories flooding back like a dam had burst in my mind. Sarah Chen. That was my name then, and that was my name now. Though everything else about me had changed in ways my 18-year-old self could never have imagined. Back at Jefferson High in Portland, Oregon, I was the quiet girl who sat in the back corner of every classroom, the one who ate lunch alone in the library, the one whose voice barely registered above a whisper when forced to speak. I wasn't unpopular because I was particularly different or strange. I was unpopular because I was invisible, and somehow that invisibility made me a target for those who needed someone to look down on. Madison Brookfield and her crew had made my 4 years at Jefferson a masterclass in systematic humiliation. Madison was everything I wasn't: blonde, confident, loud, and cruel with the precision of a surgeon. She had this way of tilting her head when she looked at me, like I was some curious insect she'd discovered under a rock. Her friends, Jessica Winters and Amanda Kozlov, were extensions of her cruelty, always ready with a laugh or sneer on cue. The incidents blurred together in my memory like a catalog of small tortures. The time they dumped chocolate milk on my white sweater in the cafeteria, then loudly apologized while making sure everyone heard how clumsy and awkward I was for being in their way. The countless times they'd walk past my locker and loudly discuss my clothes, my hair, my apparent lack of friends, as if I wasn't standing right there. But the worst part wasn't the public humiliation. It was the way they made me complicit in my own destruction. They'd ask me questions in that sickeningly sweet voice Madison had perfected. "Oh, Sarah, are you going to prom? Do you have a date?" Knowing full well the answer, forcing me to admit my loneliness out loud while they exchanged those knowing glances. Senior year was supposed to be different. I had told myself I would finally stand up, finally fight back. Instead, I shrank further into myself, counting down the days until I could escape Jefferson High and everyone in it forever. Graduation couldn't come fast enough. When I walked across that stage to receive my diploma, I made a silent promise to myself. I would never let anyone make me feel that small again. I would become someone who couldn't be pushed around, someone who commanded respect, someone who mattered. The invitation in my hands represented everything I'd tried to leave behind. For weeks, I debated whether to go. Part of me wanted to throw it in the trash and pretend Jefferson High had never existed. But another part, a part that had grown stronger over the past 20 years, whispered that maybe it was time to face those ghosts. I was no longer the frightened girl who'd graduated from Jefferson High. The woman staring back at me in the mirror had earned the right to walk into any room with her head high. My shoulders had broadened from years of physical training. My posture was straight and commanding, the result of countless hours learning to carry myself like someone who expected to be listened to. The quiet voice that had once trembled when called upon in class had been replaced by one accustomed to giving orders that people followed without question. The decision to attend came suddenly one evening as I was reviewing personnel files in my home office. I looked up at the commendation hanging on my wall, the Bronze Star with V device for valor, and something clicked. I wasn't going to the reunion as Sarah Chen, the bullied teenager. I was going as Colonel Sarah Chen, United States Navy, and there was a difference worth showing. The reunion was scheduled for Saturday night at the Portland Hilton downtown. As I drove through the familiar streets of my childhood, I felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and detachment. The city had changed, grown, modernized, but the feeling of being that scared teenager lingered at the edges of my consciousness, like a persistent shadow. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a simple black dress that was elegant without being flashy, paired with understated jewelry. Nothing about my appearance screamed military, which was intentional. I wanted to see who these people had become before they knew who I was now. The hotel ballroom was decorated in our old school colors, navy blue and gold, with round tables scattered throughout the space, and a dance floor that already hosted a few brave couples swaying to music that had been popular during our senior year. A registration table near the entrance was manned by volunteers I didn't recognize, probably spouses or younger siblings pressed into service. I approached the table and gave my name to a cheerful woman with a clipboard. She handed me a name tag with my senior yearbook photo, a picture of a girl I barely recognized anymore, all nervous smiles and uncertain eyes. I clipped it to my dress and surveyed the room. The faces were older, some barely recognizable, others exactly as I remembered them, but with added lines and silver in their hair. I spotted a few former classmates I'd actually liked, quiet kids like me who'd found each other in the margins of high school society. They waved when they saw me, genuine smiles of recognition crossing their faces. But it was the familiar laugh that caught my attention first. High-pitched, performative, designed to draw attention. Madison Brookfield's laugh hadn't changed at all. I turned toward the sound, and there she was, holding court near the bar with the same magnetic confidence she'd possessed at 17. She looked good, the kind of good that came from expensive maintenance rather than natural aging. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her dress was designer, and her posture suggested someone accustomed to being the center of attention. Jessica and Amanda flanked her like bookends, their dynamic apparently unchanged after 2 decades. I watched them for a moment, memories crystallizing with painful clarity. They were scanning the crowd, making comments to each other behind their hands, laughing at observations I couldn't hear. Some habits, it seemed, never died. It took Madison exactly 12 minutes to notice me. I know because I'd been checking my watch, curious how long it would take for their predatory instincts to kick in. When her gaze landed on me, I saw the exact moment recognition dawned. Her eyes widened slightly, then narrowed as she took in my appearance, noting the dress, the posture, the way I was standing alone but didn't seem bothered by it. She said something to Jessica and Amanda, who both turned to look at me with expressions I remembered all too well. The 3 of them began moving in my direction with the coordinated precision of a pack that had scented prey. "Oh my God, Sarah Chen! Is that really you?" Madison's voice carried that same sweet venom I remembered, though it was now filtered through 20 years of what I suspected had been a very comfortable life. "I can't believe it's really you!" "Hello, Madison," I replied, my voice steady and neutral. "Jessica, Amanda." The pleasantries that followed were a masterclass in social warfare disguised as friendly catch-up. Madison dominated the conversation, as she always had, peppering me with questions that seemed innocent on the surface but carried barbed implications underneath. "So what are you up to these days? Still living in Portland?" The emphasis on still made it clear she'd expected me to be exactly where she'd left me 20 years ago. "I travel quite a bit for work," I answered simply, offering nothing more. "Oh, how interesting! What kind of work?" Amanda chimed in, her smile not reaching her eyes. "I'm in the service sector," which was technically accurate, if not particularly informative. The vagueness clearly frustrated them. They were fishing for something to grab onto, some piece of information they could use to rebuild the old dynamic where they held all the power and I provided the entertainment through my inadequacy. "Well, that's nice," Jessica said, her tone suggesting it was anything but. "Are you married?"
Kids? Not married. No children, I replied matter-of-factly. The exchange of glances between them was subtle but unmistakable. In their world, an unmarried, childless woman approaching 40 was something to be pitied, evidence of failure to achieve life's basic milestones. Oh, well, I'm sure the right person will come along, Madison said with fake sympathy that made my teeth clench. You always were so focused on other things. The conversation continued in this vein for several more minutes, each question designed to probe for weakness, each response from me frustratingly neutral. I could see their growing agitation as they failed to find the insecurity they were looking for, the old Sarah who would have wilted under their attention. Finally, Madison's facade began to crack. The sweet smile became more forced, the questions more pointed. She was losing patience with my refusal to play the victim they expected me to be. You know, Sarah, Madison's voice took on that familiar edge I remembered from calculus class when she'd help me with problems I already understood. It's just so refreshing to see someone who stayed so true to themselves. Some people change so much after high school, you can barely recognize them. The insult was wrapped in compliment paper, but the message was clear. I was exactly the same pathetic person I'd been at 18, and that somehow made me admirably authentic in my failure to evolve. Before I could respond, a booming voice cut through the ambient chatter of the reunion. Sarah fucking Chen, is that really you? Every head in our little circle turned toward the source of the outburst. Striding across the ballroom with a grin that could have powered half of Portland was Marcus Thompson, former captain of the wrestling team and one of the few people at Jefferson who'd ever shown me genuine kindness. Marcus had been one of those rare popular kids who was popular because people actually liked him, not because they feared him. He'd defended me once when some junior varsity football players were making jokes about my lunch, telling them to knock it off with such casual authority that they had actually listened.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Now, he was built like a linebacker who'd kept himself in fighting shape. His hair was graying at the temples, and he wore his suit like someone comfortable in his own skin. When he reached our group, he swept me into a bear hug that lifted my feet off the ground. Jesus, look at you, he said, holding me at arm's length to get a better look. You look incredible, like seriously incredible. Military bearing will do that to a person. I felt Madison, Jessica, and Amanda go very still beside me. Military bearing was not a phrase that got thrown around casually, especially not with the knowing look Marcus was giving me. You know about my work? I asked, genuinely curious. Are you kidding me? My cousin Derek served under you in Afghanistan. Sergeant Saffron Thompson, 2nd Platoon? He talks about Colonel Chen like you walk on water, said you saved his unit's ass more times than he could count. The temperature in our little group seemed to drop by 10 degrees. I could practically hear the mental gears grinding as my former tormentors tried to process this information. Colonel, Jessica's voice came out as a squeak. Marcus turned to look at her as if noticing the others for the first time. His expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, taking on the polite neutrality of someone who remembered exactly who he was talking to. Oh, hey, Madison, Jessica, Amanda, didn't see you there. The lack of enthusiasm in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. Marcus, Madison recovered her composure first, as she always did. How wonderful to see you. You look fantastic. And this is so interesting about Sarah. Colonel, you said. Navy, I said simply. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Navy meant ships, submarines, and operations most people only saw in movies. Navy meant authority, responsibility, life and death decisions made in circumstances these women couldn't imagine. Wow, Amanda managed. How long have you been in? 20 years, commissioned right after college. Marcus was watching this exchange with growing amusement, clearly picking up on the undercurrents. Sarah's being modest. Derek told me she's got more decorations than a Christmas tree, Bronze Star, Navy Commendation Medal, Combat Action Ribbon, the works. I shot him a look that told him to dial it back, but the damage was already done. The three women were staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Combat? Madison's voice was smaller now, uncertain in a way I'd never heard before. Multiple deployments, Marcus continued, apparently enjoying himself now. Iraq, Afghanistan, some places Derek couldn't even tell me about. And now she's stationed at the Pentagon, right? Working on some classified stuff. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The conversation was moving in a direction I hadn't anticipated, and I could see the panic starting to creep into Amanda's eyes as she realized that the power dynamic she had expected to slip back into no longer existed. Well, she said, forcing that bright smile back onto her face, that's certainly different from what I expected. I mean, the military isn't really for everyone, is it? All that violence and aggression. The comment was designed to undermine, to suggest that my career was somehow unseemly, that I'd chosen a path that put me outside the bounds of acceptable feminine behavior. It was a last-ditch effort to reclaim some moral high ground. Marcus's jaw tightened. Violence and aggression? You mean protecting people who can't protect themselves? Making sure families can sleep safely at night? That kind of violence and aggression? I didn't mean, because let me tell you something about Colonel Chen, continued Marcus, his voice rising just enough to draw attention from nearby tables. She didn't just play soldier for 20 years. She led Marines and sailors in situations where one wrong decision could have gotten people killed. She earned every rank, every medal, every ounce of respect she commands. A small crowd was beginning to form around us, drawn by Marcus's passionate defense and the obvious tension in our group. I could see former classmates edging closer, their conversations dying as they picked up on the drama unfolding.
Sarah? A new voice joined the conversation. I turned to see Brian Rodriguez, who'd been in my AP English class. He was looking at me with a mixture of recognition and confusion. Sarah Chen? Holy shit, is it really you? Before I could answer, someone else called out from across the room. Colonel Chen! The voice was different from the casual recognition of classmates. It was sharp, military, carrying the kind of authority that made people stand straighter automatically. Every conversation in the immediate area stopped dead. Standing near the entrance to the ballroom were two men in dress blues, navy uniforms with ribbons and insignia that marked them as serious operators. The older of the two, a man in his 50s with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded rooms, was scanning the crowd until his eyes found mine. Commander Torres, I said, recognizing him immediately, despite not having seen him in civilian context before. What are you doing here? Commander Torres made his way through the crowd, which parted automatically before him. His companion, a younger man with the lean build and alert eyes of someone accustomed to danger, followed a step behind. Ma'am, we apologize for the intrusion, Torres said as he reached our group. We have a situation developing that requires your immediate attention. Pentagon's been trying to reach you for the past hour. I checked my phone and realized I'd had it on silent mode. 7 missed calls from numbers I recognized as official business. What kind of situation? I asked, my mind already shifting into operational mode. The kind that can't wait until Monday morning, Torres replied. We have a car waiting outside. The reunion, Madison, the uncomfortable trip down memory lane, all of it suddenly seemed trivial compared to whatever crisis was unfolding in the real world. I was already mentally preparing to leave when I caught sight of my former bullies' faces. They were staring at the scene with expressions of complete bewilderment. Madison's mouth was actually hanging open, her carefully constructed superiority crumbling as she watched uniformed military officers treat me with the kind of deference she'd never experienced in her life. Ma'am, the younger officer said, there's also a team from SEAL Team 7 en route to your location. They specifically requested to escort you back. Marcus whistled low under his breath. SEAL Team 7? Jesus, Sarah, what kind of work are you really doing? I was wondering the same thing. SEAL teams didn't get called in for routine Pentagon business, and they certainly didn't escort Navy colonels to meetings unless something serious was happening. How long until they arrive? I asked Torres. ETA 15 minutes, he replied, checking his watch. They're flying in from Coronado.
The crowd around us was growing larger, and I could hear whispered conversations as people tried to piece together what was happening. Words like classified and emergency were floating through the air, along with my name and rank. Jessica leaned over to Madison and whispered something urgent. Amanda was looking between me and the uniformed officers like she was watching a tennis match. The three of them clearly had no idea how to process what they were witnessing. "I should probably get my things," I said to Taurus. "Already taken care of, ma'am. We have your coat and purse from the coat check." Of course they did. Military efficiency at its finest. I turned back to Marcus, who was grinning like he'd won the lottery. "It was good seeing you," I said. "Give my regards to Derek." "Are you kidding me? He's going to lose his mind when I tell him I saw you in action. This is the best reunion story ever." Then I turned to Madison, Jessica, and Amanda, who were still standing there like deer caught in headlights. For a moment, I considered saying something cutting, some final word that would put them in their place after 20 years of carrying their cruelty around in my memory. Instead, I simply nodded. "Ladies, it's been educational." The word choice was deliberate. Educational implied they'd taught me something, shown me something about themselves that I hadn't known before. It suggested that this encounter had been worth my time in some academic sense, even if it hadn't been pleasant. Madison's face flushed red as she realized she'd been dismissed with the kind of cool professionalism she'd never be able to match. As we moved toward the exit with Commander Torres and his companion, I could hear the buzz of conversation erupting behind us. 20 years of wondering what had become of quiet Sarah Chen was about to be answered in spectacular fashion.
The Portland Hilton's lobby had transformed into an impromptu command center. What had been a quiet Saturday evening was now buzzing with activity that would have seemed surreal to anyone not familiar with military operations. 3 black SUVs sat outside the main entrance, their engines running, while men in tactical gear maintained perimeter security with the kind of casual professionalism that suggested this was routine for them. Inside, Commander Torres was speaking rapidly into a secure phone, while his companion coordinated with someone on a different line. Hotel security had been quietly briefed and were keeping curious guests at bay, though I could see reunion attendees pressed against the ballroom windows trying to figure out what was happening. "Ma'am," Torres approached me after ending his call, "SEAL Team 7 is 2 minutes out. Lieutenant Commander Hayes requested permission to brief you here rather than in transit." "Permission granted," I replied automatically, then caught myself. "What exactly is Hayes' team doing on the West Coast? Last I heard, they were operating out of Little Creek." "Special assignment, ma'am. They've been tracking a situation for the past 6 months that just went active." Before I could ask for clarification, the lobby's front doors opened with the kind of precision that announced military personnel before you even saw the uniforms. 4 men entered in a tight formation, their movements economical and purposeful. They wore dress blue uniforms that had clearly been hastily donned, but every insignia was perfect, every crease sharp. The man leading them was tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of bearing that commanded immediate attention. His uniform identified him as Lieutenant Commander Michael Hayes, and the ribbons on his chest told a story of multiple combat deployments and distinguished service. Behind him came 3 other SEALs whose youth was offset by the unmistakable confidence of elite operators. Hayes' eyes found mine immediately, and he approached with the measured stride of someone accustomed to briefing senior officers. "Colonel Chen," he said, offering a crisp salute that I returned. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes, SEAL Team 7. Ma'am, we need to discuss Operation Neptune's Trident." The code name hit me like cold water. Neptune's Trident was a classified counterterrorism operation I'd helped design 3 months earlier, while attached to Special Operations Command. It involved tracking a network of foreign operatives who'd been attempting to infiltrate critical infrastructure on the West Coast. "Status?" I asked. "Phase 3 is active as of 1800 hours, Hayes replied. "The network we've been monitoring just made their move. Multiple targets across Oregon and Washington are under immediate threat." He handed me a tablet displaying a real-time tactical overview. Red dots marked locations from Seattle to Sacramento, with threat assessments and response team assignments updating every few seconds. It was the kind of operation that required someone with both strategic oversight and operational authority to coordinate. "Why me?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "You designed the containment protocols, ma'am.
You know this network better than anyone except maybe the analysts at Langley, and they're 3,000 miles away. I studied the display, recognizing patterns I'd helped identify months earlier. The operation was elegant in its simplicity, but devastating in its potential scope. If these targets were hit simultaneously, the economic and psychological impact would be catastrophic. Command structure? I asked. You're it, ma'am. Admiral Richardson transferred operational authority to you 20 minutes ago. We're your assets until this is resolved. The weight of command settled over me like a familiar coat. This was what I'd trained for, lived for, built my entire career around, the moment when lives depended on making the right decisions under pressure. Time frame? Best intelligence suggests they'll move in the next 4 to 6 hours, one of Hayes's men spoke up. Petty Officer Jackson, according to his name tape. We have assets positioned at primary targets, but we need coordination to prevent them from shifting to alternatives. I was about to respond when I noticed something that made me pause. Through the lobby's glass windows, I could see the ballroom beyond, and pressed against those windows were faces I recognized. Madison, Jessica, and Amanda were among a crowd of reunion attendees watching the scene unfold with expressions ranging from bewilderment to awe. The irony wasn't lost on me. 20 years ago, these women had made my life miserable by convincing me I was insignificant, worthless, destined for failure. Now they were watching through glass as elite military operators waited for my orders on a mission that could affect millions of lives. Ma'am, Torres approached me after ending his call. Sorry, I said, refocusing on the tablet. Operational Command Center.
We have a mobile unit staged at PDX, but Admiral Richardson suggested we might want something more central to the potential target zone. I thought for a moment, considering logistics, communication requirements, and response times. The Coast Guard base on Swan Island, central location, secure communications, helicopter access for rapid deployment. Outstanding choice, ma'am, Hayes nodded. My team can have it operational in 30 minutes. Commander Torres approached our group. Ma'am, we have transport ready. The Admiral is standing by for your situation report. As we prepared to leave, I caught sight of Marcus Thompson pushing through the crowd in the ballroom. He managed to catch the attention of hotel security and convince them to let him approach the lobby doors. Sarah, he called out, everything okay? I walked over to the glass doors, aware that every reunion attendee was hanging on this interaction. Marcus's concern was genuine, the kind of worried expression you see from someone who actually cares about your well-being. I have to go, I told him through the glass. Work emergency. The serious kind of work emergency? He asked. I nodded. Behind him, I could see Madison straining to hear a conversation, her face a mask of frustrated curiosity. Stay safe, Marcus said simply. And Sarah, Derek was right. You really are something special. The comment was loud enough for the crowd behind him to hear, and I saw several former classmates nodding in agreement. People I barely remembered from high school were looking at me with expressions of respect and admiration, emotions I'd never seen directed my way in these halls. As I turned to leave with the SEAL team, I caught Madison's eye one final time. She was staring at me with something that might have been recognition, not of who I used to be, but of who I'd become. For the first time in 2 decades, she looked at me and saw someone she couldn't diminish, couldn't mock, couldn't reduce to the frightened teenager she'd once terrorized. The lobby doors closed behind us as we headed for the waiting vehicles. Hayes fell into step beside me as we walked toward the lead SUV. Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, what was that about back there? I glanced back at the hotel, where faces were still pressed against the windows watching our departure. High school reunion, I replied. Hayes followed my gaze, taking in the crowd of well-dressed middle-aged people staring after us with expressions of amazement. Have that go, he asked, with the dry humor that seemed to be standard issue among SEALs. Better than expected, I said, climbing into the SUV. As we pulled away from the hotel, I could see the reunion continuing inside, but I knew the conversations had changed. Instead of gossip about divorces and career disappointments, they'd be talking about Sarah Chen, the quiet girl who'd become a colonel, the one who'd been escorted away by Navy SEALs on a mission that clearly mattered to national security.
Hayes was briefing me on team compositions and asset deployment, but part of my mind was still processing what had just happened. For 20 years, I'd carried the weight of those high school humiliations, letting them fuel my drive to become someone who couldn't be pushed around. Tonight, I'd finally put that weight down. The real Sarah Chen, not the frightened teenager or the overcompensating adult, was the woman coordinating with elite military operators to protect American lives. She was someone who'd earned respect through service, sacrifice, and competence. She was someone who didn't need validation from people who'd peaked in high school. ETA to Swan Island is 12 minutes, the driver reported. I looked at the tactical display Hayes had handed me, studying the evolving threat picture that would require every bit of training and experience I had accumulated over 2 decades of military service. Madison Brookfield and her friends had become irrelevant the moment I'd chosen to become someone worth respecting. Now I had work to do, the kind of work that actually mattered. Swan Island Coast Guard Base materialized out of the Portland night like something from a military thriller. What had been a quiet Saturday evening facility was now ablaze with activity as helicopters touched down on the landing pad and communication arrays extended skyward like mechanical flowers reaching for satellites. The mobile command unit Hayes had promised was already operational when our convoy arrived. Inside the converted trailer, banks of monitors displayed real-time intelligence feeds from across the Pacific Northwest. Analysts from various agencies, CIA, NSA, FBI, and military intelligence, were coordinating through secure video links, their faces grim as they tracked the unfolding threat. "Sit rep," I commanded as I entered the trailer, my dress heels clicking against the metal flooring in a rhythm that seemed oddly appropriate for the gravity of the situation. Agent Patricia Wells from the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force looked up from her station. "Ma'am, we have confirmed movement at 7 of the 12 potential targets. The pattern matches the infiltration model you developed in the March briefings." She gestured to a large display showing the West Coast with pulsing indicators marking locations from Boeing's Everett facility to the port of Long Beach. Each marker represented a critical piece of American infrastructure that, if compromised simultaneously, could cripple the regional economy and send shockwaves through global markets. "Time since last contact with embedded assets?" I asked. "Varies by location," Wells replied, consulting her notes. "Seattle team checked in 47 minutes ago. Portland assets went dark 31 minutes ago." Going dark wasn't necessarily cause for alarm, but operational security sometimes required radio silence. But the timing concerned me. If the enemy network was moving to active phase, they'd likely detected some of our surveillance and are taking countermeasures. Lieutenant Commander Hayes approached with a steaming cup of coffee and a grim expression. "Ma'am, we've got a problem. Intelligence suggests they've moved up their timeline. Instead of the 4 to 6 hour window we discussed, we might be looking at 90 minutes. The revelation hit the command center like a physical blow. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as analysts turned to stare at the displays with new urgency. 90 minutes was barely enough time to coordinate existing assets, let alone deploy additional resources. "Confidence level on that intelligence?" I asked. 85%, Hayes replied. "NSA intercepted communications indicating phase transitioning occurring ahead of schedule. Combined with the movement patterns we're seeing, it's the most logical interpretation." I studied the tactical display, running scenarios in my head with the speed that came from 2 decades of operational planning. The enemy had chosen their targets brilliantly. Each one was far enough from the others to prevent a coordinated response, but close enough that simultaneous strikes would create cascading failures throughout the region's infrastructure. "Options?" I asked the room. Agent Wells spoke first. "We could coordinate with local law enforcement for simultaneous raids on known positions. High probability of stopping some attacks, but likely to spook the others into accelerating their timeline."
Unacceptable, I replied immediately. If even 3 of these targets are hit, the economic impact will be catastrophic. We need to stop all of them. Petty Officer Jackson, one of Hayes's team members, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, there is another option. More aggressive, higher risk, but potentially higher reward." "Speak." "Instead of trying to stop 12 simultaneous attacks, we force them to consolidate. Make them believe they've been compromised and need to fall back to a single high-value target that we can then defend with overwhelming force." The suggestion was audacious, the kind of thinking that separated elite operators from conventional forces. Instead of playing defense across multiple locations,
we'd manipulate the enemy into concentrating their forces where we wanted them. Elaborate, I said. Jackson moved to the tactical display, highlighting several locations. We selectively reveal some of our surveillance at lower priority targets, making it obvious we're onto them at those locations. Standard doctrine would be to fall back to their primary objective, which our intelligence suggests is the Columbia River Bridge system. The Columbia River bridges were indeed a primary target that would make sense from a terrorist perspective. Destroying them would sever critical transportation links between Oregon and Washington, disrupt commerce worth billions of dollars, and create the kind of symbolic victory that terrorist organizations craved. But here's the thing, Jackson continued, warming to his theme. We've been monitoring their communications for months. We know their fallback protocols, their emergency regrouping procedures, their backup command structure. We can predict exactly where they'll consolidate. Hayes was nodding slowly as he followed Jackson's logic. We could have every available asset positioned and waiting. Instead of spreading our forces thin across 12 targets, we concentrate everything on the one location we know they'll choose. It was elegant, risky, and exactly the kind of tactical thinking that had made me want to work with special operations in the first place. But it also meant deliberately allowing the enemy to believe they were succeeding in their mission right up until the moment we closed the trap. Risk assessment? I asked. Primary risk is intelligence failure, Wells said, consulting her tablet. If we're wrong about their fallback protocols, we could end up with all our assets in the wrong place while they hit their actual targets. Secondary risk is timing, Hayes added. The window for manipulation is narrow. If we wait too long to spring the deception, they might complete their original plan before falling back. I walked to the central display, studying the pattern of targets and thinking through variables that weren't displayed on any screen. The enemy network had been operating for months, following protocols they'd established long before we'd started monitoring them. Their response to compromise would be instinctive, following training and procedures they'd rehearsed. Ma'am, a new voice interrupted my thoughts. Communications specialist Davis had been monitoring radio traffic and now looked up with an expression of barely controlled excitement. I'm picking up chatter from the direction of the Hilton Hotel, multiple news vans, increased police presence. Looks like word about military activity is starting to spread. The reunion. In the intensity of operational planning, I'd almost forgotten about the crowd of former classmates who had witnessed my departure with a SEAL team. In the age of social media, it was inevitable that someone would start posting about mysterious military operations in downtown Portland. How bad? I asked. Local news is running with military emergency in Portland, but they don't have details. Social media is mostly speculation. However, Davis paused, consulting his screen. Some of the posts are specifically mentioning Navy SEALs and a female colonel. Names haven't surfaced yet, but if someone starts connecting dots, the implication was clear. If my identity became public while Operation Neptune's Trident was active, it could compromise operational security. Enemy networks monitored American media and social platforms for exactly this kind of intelligence. Hayes stepped forward. Ma'am, we could have FBI coordinate with local authorities to limit media access. No, I said immediately. Heavy-handed media suppression would only draw more attention. Besides, we have bigger problems. I walked to the central display, studying the pattern of targets and thinking through variables that weren't displayed on any screen. The enemy network had been operating for months, following protocols they'd established long before we'd started monitoring them. Their response to compromise would be instinctive, following training and procedures they'd rehearsed. Here's what we're going to do, I announced to the room. We implement Jackson's plan with modifications. Phase 1, selective revelation of surveillance at targets 7, 9, and 11. Make it obvious enough that their watchers will report compromise, but subtle enough that it looks like operational error rather than deliberate exposure. Phase 2? Hayes asked.
We position assets at the Columbia River complex, but maintain skeleton crews at all other locations. If the deception fails and they proceed with the original plan, we still have options. And Phase 3? Wells inquired. We wait. When they consolidate at the bridges, we close the trap with overwhelming force. No survivors, no opportunity for them to signal other cells, no chance for this network to reconstitute. The room fell silent as the implications sank in.
What I was proposing was essentially a large-scale ambush operation that would require split-second timing and absolute coordination between multiple agencies and military units. "Ma'am," Hayes said quietly, "this is the kind of operation that makes careers or destroys them." I looked around the command center at the faces of people who'd volunteered to put their lives on the line for something bigger than themselves. Analysts who'd worked 18-hour days to track this threat, operators who'd left their families to deploy at a moment's notice, communications specialists monitoring enemy chatter in languages most Americans couldn't pronounce. "Then we'd better make sure it makes them," I replied. Outside the command trailer, I could hear the rhythmic thump of helicopter rotors as additional assets arrived. The reunion I'd attended just 2 hours earlier seemed like something from another lifetime, a trivial concern from a world where the biggest worry was whether former bullies would recognize how much I'd changed. Now I was about to find out if 20 years of training, education, and experience had prepared me for the moment when everything hung in the balance. The Columbia River Bridge Complex at 0247 hours was a study in controlled chaos. From my position in the elevated command post overlooking the water, I could see the careful choreography of an operation that had taken exactly 73 minutes to orchestrate. SEAL Team 7 had positioned themselves with surgical precision, while FBI tactical units covered approach routes and Coast Guard vessels secured the waterways below. The deception had worked flawlessly. At 0134 hours, we'd begun selective exposure of our surveillance at the lower priority targets. By 0156 hours, intercepted communications confirmed the enemy network was aborting their distributed attack plan. At 0203 hours, signals intelligence indicated they were consolidating forces for a single, high-impact strike on the bridge system. Now they were coming to us. Thermal imaging confirms 17 individuals approaching from the North Access Road. Vehicle signatures matched the intel package, 2 vans, 1 sedan, consistent with the cell structure we've been tracking. Lieutenant Commander Hayes adjusted his position on the tactical display, coordinating with his team members who were invisible in the darkness below. All Bravo elements in position. Overwatch confirms clear fields of fire. Agent Wells monitored FBI frequencies while coordinating with local law enforcement who were maintaining a security perimeter 5 miles out. Portland PD reports all civilian traffic has been diverted. Oregon State Police have secondary checkpoints established, no media penetration of the operational zone. The terrorist cell moved with professional competence, their approach routes suggesting military training and detailed reconnaissance of the target area. Through night vision scopes, I could see figures deploying with tactical precision, carrying equipment packages that surveillance had identified as high-yield explosive devices. Phase line Alpha reached, Hayes reported quietly. Targets are committed to the assault. This was the point of no return. The enemy had moved far enough into our kill zone that retreat was no longer tactically viable. Whatever happened in the next 10 minutes would determine whether Operation Neptune's Trident became a textbook success or a catastrophic failure. "All stations, this is actual." I spoke into my headset with the calm authority that 2 decades of command had ingrained. "Execute on my mark. Remember, we need at least 2 alive for intelligence exploitation." The seconds stretched like hours as I watched the terrorist team complete their final approach. They moved with confidence, believing they'd successfully evaded surveillance and were about to strike a blow that would resonate around the world. They had no idea they were walking into a trap designed by someone who'd spent months studying their tactics, their psychology, their operational preferences. "Mark," I said quietly. The Columbia River erupted in coordinated violence. SEAL Team snipers engaged from 3 directions simultaneously, their suppressed rifles eliminating the outer security perimeter in less than 2 seconds. Hayes and his assault team emerged from concealed positions like ghosts, materializing from the darkness, moving with the fluid precision of predators who'd rehearsed this scenario countless times.
The terrorist cell's response was immediate and professional, seeking cover and returning fire with automatic weapons that split the night with muzzle flashes. But they were fighting an enemy that had chosen the time, place, and terms of engagement. "Tango down, northwest position," Hayes reported over the tactical network. "2 tangos moving toward the bridge structure," called up Petty Officer Jackson, intercepting. The battle lasted exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds.
When the shooting stopped, 15 members of the terrorist network were dead, and 2 were in custody, with wounds that were serious but not life-threatening. 0 American casualties. Bomb disposal team inbound, Wells reported. Initial sweep indicates approximately 40 pounds of C4 with remote detonation capability. If they'd succeeded in placing the charges, she didn't need to finish the sentence. The Columbia River bridges carried more than freight and commuter traffic. They were arteries connecting 2 states, economic lifelines that supported millions of jobs and billions of dollars in commerce. As the immediate tactical situation wound down, I found myself thinking about the chain of events that had led to this moment. If I hadn't attended the reunion, I might have been at home with my phone on silent, unreachable when the Pentagon needed to coordinate this operation. If Madison and her friends hadn't tried to humiliate me one more time, I might have left the hotel earlier and missed the urgent communications entirely. The irony was profound. The women who'd once made my life miserable had unknowingly contributed to preventing a terrorist attack that could have killed hundreds and caused economic damage measured in the billions. "Ma'am," Hayes approached as his team secured the scene. "Outstanding operational plan. Textbook execution of tactical deception. My men are honored to have served under your command." The compliment meant more than he could have known. Respect from warriors like Hayes wasn't given lightly. It was earned through competence, courage, and the ability to make life-and-death decisions under pressure. As dawn broke over the Columbia River, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson, I received a secure call from Admiral Richardson at the Pentagon. Colonel Chen, his voice carried satisfaction and relief in equal measure. "Preliminary reports indicate complete mission success. 0 American casualties, complete neutralization of the terrorist network, significant intelligence harvest from captured materials." "Thank you, sir. Credit belongs to the tactical teams. SEAL Team 7 performed flawlessly under pressure." "Nevertheless, this operation will be studied at the War College for years to come. The deception strategy you implemented was brilliant, turning their own protocols against them, forcing them to concentrate their forces where we had overwhelming advantage. That's the kind of tactical innovation that defines careers." After ending the call, I stood on the observation deck watching the sunrise over Portland, thinking about the path that had brought me here. 20 years earlier, I'd walked across a graduation stage, promising myself I'd never let anyone make me feel small again. That promise had driven me through military academy, through deployments in dangerous places, through the endless training and education required to reach field-grade rank. But somewhere along the way, the promise had evolved into something larger. It wasn't enough to avoid being diminished by others. I wanted to become someone who could protect people who couldn't protect themselves, someone whose decisions could prevent suffering and preserve the freedoms that most Americans took for granted. My phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus Thompson. "Sarah, whatever you did last night, the news is calling it a successful counterterrorism operation that prevented significant infrastructure damage. Pretty sure that's the military speak for you being a complete badass. Hope you're safe." The message made me smile. Marcus had always been able to cut through complexity and get to the heart of things. As the tactical teams completed their evidence collection and the scene was transferred to FBI control, I found myself with a few minutes to check social media, something I rarely did, but curiosity got the better of me. The reunion hashtag, #JeffersonHigh2004, was trending locally, but not for the reasons anyone had expected. Instead of typical reunion posts about weight gain and career updates, the entire conversation had been hijacked by speculation about the military operation that had extracted one of their former classmates. Madison Brookfield had posted a photo of the hotel lobby filled with military personnel with the caption, "When your high school reunion gets interrupted by Navy SEALs, some people really did peak after graduation. #mindblown, #respect the service." The post had over 3,000 likes and hundreds of comments, most of them asking who the mysterious colonel was and what kind of operation required SEAL team deployment on American soil.
Jessica Winters had shared a more personal reflection. Sometimes you don't realize how wrong you were about someone until 20 years later. To my former classmate who left our reunion to serve her country in ways we'll probably never fully understand, thank you for your service and your sacrifice.
Even Amanda Kozlov, who'd always been the most vicious of the three, had posted something that approached humility. High school Sarah Chen just saved lives we'll never know about, while we were gossiping about whose marriage was falling apart. Perspective is everything. But it was Marcus's latest post that struck me most deeply. Proud to have known Colonel Sarah Chen since we were teenagers. She was always destined for greatness. Some of us just weren't smart enough to see it back then. Tonight, she reminded us all what real strength looks like. The comments under his post told a story of recognition and regret. Former classmates were sharing memories of times they'd overlooked me, dismissed me, or failed to recognize qualities that had been there all along. Teachers were posting about a quiet student who'd always submitted exceptional work but never sought attention for it. Agent Wells approached with a clipboard full of forms requiring my signature. "Ma'am, the debriefing team will need about an hour of your time for the after-action report. After that, you're cleared to return to normal activities." Normal activities. The phrase seemed almost absurd after the night I'd experienced. How do you return to normal after preventing a terrorist attack? How do you go back to routine Pentagon meetings after commanding a multi-agency operation that saved lives and critical infrastructure? But that was the nature of military service. Moments of intense responsibility and life-or-death decisions, followed by the mundane necessity of paperwork and administrative tasks. As I completed the bureaucratic requirements of successful operations, my thoughts kept returning to the reunion and the women who'd tried so hard to make me feel insignificant. They'd approached me expecting to find the same frightened teenager they'd tormented, someone they could diminish and dismiss. Instead, they'd encountered a woman who'd spent 20 years becoming someone worth respecting, someone whose judgment could be trusted with national security, someone who could coordinate elite military units and make decisions that affected millions of lives. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been built through countless small choices: to work harder than required, to volunteer for difficult assignments, to study and train and prepare for responsibilities I couldn't even imagine when I started. Each choice had been made partly to prove something to those who underestimated me, but mostly to prove something to myself. By the time I finally left Swan Island, Portland was fully awake and going about its Sunday morning routine. Families were heading to church, joggers were running along the waterfront, coffee shops were serving customers who had no idea that their city had been the target of a terrorist attack just hours earlier. That anonymity was part of what made military service meaningful. The best operations were the ones no one ever heard about, the threats neutralized before they could materialize, the disasters prevented rather than responded to. As I drove through the familiar streets of my childhood, I realized that attending the reunion had given me something I hadn't expected. Not closure with the past, but clarity about the present. I was no longer the woman who needed validation from people who'd peaked in high school. I was Colonel Sarah Chen, and that was enough. The girl who'd once eaten lunch alone in the library had become a woman who could stand in a command center surrounded by elite operators and know that she belonged there, that her voice carried authority earned through service and sacrifice. Madison Brookfield and her friends had taught me an important lesson, not the one they'd intended. They'd shown me what it looked like when someone's power came from diminishing others, when confidence was built on making other people feel small. I'd chosen a different path, one where strength came from protecting others, where authority was earned through competence and sacrifice, where respect was built through service rather than demanded through intimidation. As I pulled into my driveway, I realized that the reunion had ended exactly as it should have, not with dramatic confrontations or clever comebacks, but with me walking away to do work that actually mattered, surrounded by people who understood the weight of real responsibility. 20 years after graduation, I'd finally learned the most important lesson of all. The opinions of small people only matter if you let them. I'd stopped letting them matter a long time ago, and that had made all the difference. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.